Started.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Knowledge Management Community of DC, and we meet monthly to discuss knowledge management and related knowledge and expertise. And today, we're very lucky. Today, we have Kim Essendrup, who is a wonderful project manager practitioner. He is going to talk to us about the RAID log, which is just a wonderful way to manage projects and a product that can be used for the most efficient way of managing the project. So we're really excited. He's going to talk to us today about that. So let me hand it over to Kim.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
How about now?
Awesome.
Sounds okay. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Today, I'm going to be talking about RAID logs. I don't have nearly the depth of experience and knowledge management as you do, and I am interested in learning about the knowledge management perspective of a tool that I know very well from the project world. So I'm really looking forward to your questions and your feedback. I will be once in a while glancing over at the meeting chat. So if you've got questions, feel free to shoot them over there, okay? Well, let's jump in. My name is Kim Essendrup. I'm a project management professional. I've been in project management for, I don't know, about 20 years, maybe a little over 20 years now. And I've got two jobs that I absolutely love, going on 3 jobs. So the first one is that I'm one of the co-hosts of the Project Management Happy Hour podcast. And what's great about this is that we get really interesting guests about project management and related disciplines on the podcast, and experts come on and we get to ask them a lot of great questions, and it's a great opportunity to learn. But as cool as that is, my favorite part is actually that I get to talk to our listeners. We've got a membership community. We've got a couple of them here tonight, which I'm really glad to see. And my favorite part of PM Happy Hour is that I actually get to engage directly with our community. And it's really interesting to help and support them in coaching opportunities, because I get to see what's working for them and kind of what they struggle with. And hopefully I can help them out with that. My second favorite job is for Kolme Group. And Kolme Group is a kind of small consultancy, and we focus on implementing project and portfolio management tools. So all those tools you use to manage your projects, like, you know, the big enterprise project management suites, those are the kinds of things that we help try to implement for our customers to help organizations successfully manage their portfolios and their teams and forecast their business and manage their capital budgets. And as such, I get the really cool opportunity to work with a whole bunch of really cool organizations. I get to work with those leaders in all different industries, in IT, biotech, you know, fast food, even construction. And I get to see what's working really well for them. And I also get to see where they are struggling as organizations, which again is maybe even more interesting and morbidly fascinating than where they're winning. And so I feel really privileged to be in a position where I can see the successes and the struggles and challenges that both individuals and organizations face when they manage their projects and portfolios. And I'd say if there are 2 universal truths that I've learned through all this, it's that first, no matter who you are or what industry you're in, project management is tough. When you're taking and you're going to make a change, you're changing the way people behave, you're changing the way people think, or you're bringing something new into the world. And that's hard. It's a messy, messy business. And that's why it takes leaders like us and an entire professional discipline to try and get these things done and make these changes happen. The other universal truth that I found is this: it's that projects go wrong because of the basics. And what I mean by that, it's the fundamentals. It's not that you didn't have a 1,500 line project plan. It's not that you didn't do a statistical PERT analysis or a Monte Carlo analysis on all your project plan and all this kind of thing. It's when you don't pay attention to the basics, the fundamental disciplines of project management, and that's really where things start to go wrong. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is a tool to help us manage those things, ways to keep your project on track, and of course, correct yourself and your project if you start going off track. And when we talk about why projects go wrong, often we talk about, well, projects go wrong because of communications or because requirements were not right. And that's not wrong. I mean, that's true. But I might suggest that planning for and staying on top of the things that you need to communicate and managing the assumptions and dependencies, all the things that are required around requirements gathering and managing requirements effectively, a RAID log is really a great tool for this. So let's talk about, let's jump ahead a little bit today. Let's talk about what we're going to focus on today. And again, I'm looking forward to my chat. Speak up, stop, ask questions. I really like interactivity. So by the end of today, I hope that you learn a little bit more about RAID logs and how they can be used for operational knowledge management. And I hope you'll also learn a little bit about how to use a RAID log. Even if you're a seasoned professional project manager, I'm guessing we can give you a couple new ideas. And if you're new to it, hopefully we can give you a nice introduction to this, what I think is an essential tool. And to help illustrate some of the value, what I'd like to do is start off with a little story about RAID logs. And so some years ago, I took a job as the PMO lead for a European-based professional services organization. And they were launching a project management organization to manage their services all across Europe. And it was a really fun project, really amazing team. And so I was living in Phoenix, and I'd be popping over to Europe once a month or so. But most of my work was going to be remote, which, that worked out for both of us. Not long after I started, it was on a Friday, late morning, my time, which would have been end of day on Friday, their time. I got a phone call. And if you're in project management and you get a phone call that's late on a Friday, it's never going to be a good phone call. So I received a phone call from my managing executive, and they said, look, we got a big problem. A project that we have is going off the rails. Since you're now in charge of the PMO, it's your problem. You need to fix it. And the problem was that we had a project team that was delivering a project up in the UK Midlands, kind of in a, I'll say remote, but it was kind of out there. It was not super easy to get to. And that project had gone so far off track that not only did the customer plan to cancel the project, but they had issued a legal letter to us saying that they were going to charge us tens of thousands of pounds for the pain and suffering that our terrible project had cost them. So that was my weekend. By Monday morning, I was jet lagged, exhausted, and drinking some pretty nasty coffee in this really dank 1970s vintage conference room somewhere in the UK Midlands. And I was getting roasted by the customer's executives. And they were going on and on about how our team was not doing this, we weren't doing that, we weren't managing things. They had no idea what was going on. They had seen no progress. And as I listened to them, I kept thinking, that makes sense. That sounds legit. I would be mad too. And so, what do we do? So I just kept trying to get them to talk more about the issue. Tell me about your pain. Tell me about the issues that you're saying. And I asked a couple clarifying questions, but I let them exhaust themselves. And when they were done, I said, okay, is that it? And they said, yeah. So then I looked at my side of the conference room table that had all of our company team on it. And I said, what about you? Did you have any problems? Did you have any issues? Oh, and they lit up. They were talking about, well, the customer didn't give us this, we need that. And they kept going on about how the customer didn't support them, didn't give them anything they needed. So there's no possible way they could have made any progress because the customer didn't help them. And so I listened, each complaint, I thought, that actually sounds pretty legit. That sounds like a real problem. And when they had finally exhausted themselves, I looked around and I said, okay, can you show me your RAID log, please? And they all kind of looked at each other. And they were confused. They were like, well, we don't have, I said, do you not have a RAID log? And they didn't answer. And at that moment, I wasn't sure if they didn't know what a RAID log was and they were too embarrassed to say they didn't have one or didn't know, or if they knew what a RAID log was and they were totally embarrassed that they hadn't been maintaining one. Either way, I let the little awkward silence float in the dank conference room. And I said, okay, well, and I flipped open my laptop and I plugged in the projector and I had my RAID log template. I projected it up on the overhead and I said, all right, let's begin. Now, I'll come back to this story later on in today's talk. But first, let's talk a little bit about what a RAID log is. So a RAID log, it's been around forever. I've done some research. I've tried to figure out where it came from, who invented it, what organization. I can't find it. It was old school when I started project management, and that was a long time ago. They've been around for decades and decades. And so in its most simple and original form, it's really just a spreadsheet with 4 tabs, one each for risks, actions, issues, and decisions. RAID. And that's it, RAID log. But there's really so much more to that. What you do is you can use it to run your project. You can use it to perform ad hoc planning. It's stupid simple, but it's a fundamental tool that most of us as project managers have used or have heard of. And, I know for myself, as I would get into other things, I would start playing with other tools, other ways to manage. But I always found that when I've been managing a project and my project is starting to go off the rails, or if I'm helping somebody else whose project is going off the rails or is way in the ditch, I find that I have never had to rescue a project, whether it's somebody else's or my own, if a RAID log has been kept up to date. So let's talk about a little bit more about a RAID log and where it fits in the scheme and why you would use one. But let's do a quiz first. Why do most projects fail? Why do most projects go wrong? We covered this earlier. It's because of the basics. Projects fail because of the basics, and what a RAID log does, it's valuable because it helps us manage those basics. But let's get a little bit more specific. Why do projects go wrong? Well, in my experience, projects don't go wrong because of the task that you have in your plan, or because of your Kanban or your Gantt chart or your backlog or anything like that. It's all the things that happen around those tasks. It's all the things that you have to do to make sure that all those activities, your project plan, your backlog, your Kanban, but whatever it is, it's all the things you have to do to make sure those things get done in your plan to your plan. And so really, a RAID log is not the plan. It's about keeping your plan on track. I'll say it one more time. The RAID log is not your plan. It's what you use to keep your plan on track. And what are the things we think about when it comes to projects going off track? If I said, tell me what makes a project go wrong, or what have you seen take one of your projects off track, and we had Post-it notes here and we're all in the room, we'd cover the walls and the ceiling with all different things that go wrong. But I'll wager that of all those things, we can probably categorize those 4 ways. And those ways we can categorize them can give us a direction on how to manage those potential things that can take us off track. And so first, we've got risks. They're the things that we identify ahead of time that, this might go wrong. This might take our project and, take it off the rails and cause a lot of problems. And if we don't manage risks, then we really aren't doing our job to keep our plan on track. What about issues? Well, an issue is something that has already happened that's taken our project off track. Could be major, could be kind of minor. And so we need to manage those to ensure that we're staying on top of the issues, that we're owning them and getting them resolved, and then taking time to understand what are the impacts of the issues, and is there any cleanup we have to do after the fact? We'll talk more about these a little bit. And we've got action items, and these are the things that fall through the cracks sometimes, the meeting follow-ups, to making sure we have our bases covered, the 1,000 little things that we have to do as project managers, which don't go on our plan. And finally, maybe the biggest one is decision-making. Did the right people make the right decisions? You have to make decisions about who to communicate with, what to communicate, and when. Were the right people involved in key decisions, including the very first decision on the project, which is, should we do this project, right? Who made that decision and why did they make that? So you've got to track that. And so when we think about a RAID log, it's really an operational tool. It's an operational methodology. It's not just a spreadsheet. It's a way of thinking about running our projects and keeping them on track. And some of the things you're going to use for planning up front, like identifying and responding to risks, identifying key decision points in your project and how you're going to get those decisions made. But it's also about tracking and communicating all the ad hoc things that come up throughout the life cycle of the project. New risks going to come up as you learn more about the project and as you proceed. You're going to have new issues, unfortunately. It's going to happen. New decisions you're going to have to get made that maybe you didn't think of at front, or you might have to revisit past decisions and maybe change them and understand, why. And there's always the never-ending stream of action items. And when it comes to RAID logs, the worst thing that you can do, and I am so guilty of this, is that you create your RAID log at the beginning of your project and you say, oh, look, here's my RAID log. I've got 50 risks here and I scored them just like the PMI says I should. And then I've got all my decisions laid out here. And it's a beautiful, beautiful RAID log. It's so great. I populated it. I did everything I was supposed to do. I should get PDUs for this because I did such a good job. And then what do? You upload it to SharePoint where no one will ever see it again. It's a big mistake that we're all probably guilty of, especially early in our careers. And what I want you to encourage you to think about is, if you're using a RAID log, to get the value out of it, you have to make it a regular working tool. You have to have that thing open at least weekly. Daily is even better, depending on the stage of your project, but you have to use it as an ongoing tool. Now, let's talk about assumptions and dependencies. You may have heard RAID, R-A-I-D, in a RAID log, standing for risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. And I'll say that's not wrong, but it's not as right as it could be. And the reason for that is that an assumption it's a planning assumption. So I'm going to assume I'm going to plan this project to, I don't know, build a new garage for my house. And I can plan it all out and I'll make an assumption that, yes, I can get planning permission in the next month. And I'll make an assumption that, it's the dirt in my backyard is normal. Those are planning assumptions. And then if it turns out that your planning assumptions were wrong, well, then your project is in the skids, which really starts to sound a lot like a risk. So I would say when you start your project, you've got a number of planning assumptions like, oh, I can find an affordable contractor. I've got dirt, not stone in my backyard, or I can get planning permission within a month. Those are all risks. So they should be the first things you put into your risk log. And that's how you manage them. You look at your risks, you prioritize them, you try to understand what are some mitigating activities, and then you monitor them just like any other risk. So assumption seems kind of redundant. Dependencies, if you've got dependencies with an external party or dependencies within your project plan, that kind of thing is usually managed in your project schedule or your project plan. You've got dependencies, this and then that, you've got your critical path. So dependencies are usually handled that way. There is one important exception that I'll talk about later today where it can really make sense to break off your dependencies. But I would say for the most part, dependencies are usually best handled in context of your plan. On the other hand, action items, they happen almost every day on your project. So you've got to have some way to manage them. And then decisions happen all the time as well. Decisions can come up. You've got to make all kinds of decisions. Should we approve this change? What color is this button? What kind of hardware are we going to use? These are all decisions that you probably have to make through the life of the project. So by keeping this more active, more operationally focused, we keep our RAID log something that's more useful to us on a day-to-day basis. All right, now let's shift gears just a little bit. Now, if you work in an agile way, your organization works agile, in the project management world, this is, this is now a big part of it. What I will occasionally hear from somebody who's enthusiastic about agile ways of working is that they'll say, well, you know what? We work agile, so we don't need to do that stuff. That doesn't apply to us. And I'd say, I don't think I agree with that. I mean, if you look at the Agile Manifesto, which I've got in front of us, there's nothing in here about we don't do this stuff. We don't have risks or issues. And so whenever I have this conversation with somebody from, who's really focused on the fact that we don't need this because we're agile, I just ask a couple questions. I said, well, do things ever go wrong? And they say, well, yeah, things go wrong. Okay, well, okay, then you've got issues. And if you think of those ahead of time, there are things that could go wrong. That's a risk. Now, what about action items? Do you ever have to do things that are not put in your Kanban board? Do you ever have follow-up items? Do you have do you have to follow up people? Do you have to get things done, meeting minute action items, things like that? Does everything you do end up in that Kanban board? Absolutely everything? Oh, no, not everything. That's ridiculous. Well, of course, there's your action items. And do decisions have to get made? Yeah, decisions have to get made. So that starts to really sound like a RAID log. And so my perspective is that regardless of your method of working, if you are more predictive or more agile, or really like 99% of us, you're somewhere in that continuum, you can still get value out of a RAID log. Whether you manage a project, whether you manage a product in kind of a more agile working environment, a RAID log is great for product management. Or I'm more of a scrum master, I'm managing a team and I need to take care of the care and feeding of that team. That RAID log can be focused around that team. And in all those circumstances, a RAID log can provide great value. Now, in fact, we might think of a risk log, like a spreadsheet that has a bunch of risks. That's not a very agile-y thing, right? It's not, there's no Post-its, we're not moving things around a board. And actually the only book I could find, and if you know of another one, please let me know. The only thing I could find that really focus on agile risk management is this book by Dr. Alan Moran. And this book really talks about agile and the risk environment. And of course, working in a more agile way inherently reduces risk across the project, but there's still risks. And after talking about how to approach it, his final conclusion was to manage risk, you should create a risk register is basically what it comes down to. So we're kind of, yep, we'll have this in a risk log and our RAID log. All right. Enough about that. Let's get down and talk specifics into RAID log proper. So first tab, risks. A risk is any uncertain event which can affect your project. Technically, it could be a good thing or a bad thing that you're not expecting. Seems like it's never really the good things that surprise us. So we'll focus on the bad things that can happen. And there are a lot of, there's a lot of thought, a lot of documentation on how to approach risk. So I'm not going to dig down into it too much. The Project Management Institute has a document called the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK. Version 6 goes into this really well. And I think the risk practice guide that they have goes really good into a practice. And if you're a PMP, project management professional, you've already done this 100 times. So I won't go too deep into it. But what's really important here is to think about the process. The most important aspect of which is that you need to stop at some point in your project, get your team into a room and say, okay, where are all the ways that this project can go wrong? And sit there and let them brainstorm. And there's a lot of brainstorming techniques and documentation, but just start asking questions. Draw me a picture of where we are today, where we're going to be in the future, and then how do we get from here to there, and tell me all the ways that that can go wrong. You need to stop as a team and think about it. And just having that conversation alone can really help you avoid a lot of potential pitfalls. I mean, so often we get so enthusiastic when we get a new project, we go right into the weeds. We start getting focused on, okay, give me my task plan of 150 tasks, and we're going to start scheduling this, and we're going to get this thing done. It's going to be the greatest project ever, ever, ever. And we never really stop to think, where can this go wrong? And what can I do to change my plan? Maybe it's just a little bit. Maybe I rent this device instead of trying to buy it, or maybe I go to this. Maybe I avoid some potential schedule delays by expediting shipping. Just little things you can do to your plan can really help you avoid a lot of problems. There's an organization called the Standish Group. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're an analyst or seen their stats. And I haven't seen the latest stats, but every year they do an analysis with organizations to look at the success and failure rates of projects. And I think the 2020 report said on average, 31 of projects completely succeed in every way. And 19% of projects utterly fail. And all the rest kind of flounder somewhere in between. So, and we all know that. We know projects go off track all the time, and we felt the pain and we have to correct them. So if you know the stats are that bad, if you know that your project is at risk and things can go wrong, you're kind of doing yourself and your team, your project and your sponsors a disservice if you don't stop and spend some time thinking about what can go wrong on this project and how am I going to try to avoid that. One more doom and gloom statistic, McKinsey did an analysis several years ago, and they found that 17% of ERP implementations go so badly that they threaten the very existence of the company that they're being implemented for. And if you've ever been in an organization that has done major, like an SAP implementation, you know it's a scary thing. So the moral of the story is this, is that you have to ask yourself if you're doing the right thing and going the right way, and you need to work with your team to look at where your project can go off track and correct it. And that's why risk management is really important. Now, it's not just about doing that initial exercise, but developing your plan and seeing it through. So if you've got risks and you develop a plan to respond to those risks, you need to monitor them and make sure that you stay on top of them, make sure that they don't actually turn into issues. And if they do, you need to respond to them and you need to make sure that your response plans are absolutely on track. So a lot more we can talk about risks, but we got just about an hour today. So let's jump ahead and talk a little about action items. So action items, they're just that. They're like the little Post-it notes that pile up, the little things that pile up and make you always feel like you're flooded with things to do. And I like to draw a distinction between an action item and an activity in your project plan or your backlog. So for me, an action item is a task or an activity that does not directly contribute to delivering project value, but it's important for supporting the activities that do. And so there are a lot of things that fit in this category. So a few examples are, I'm having a meeting with my team and, oh, hey, we need to find a new conference room, or we need to follow up on getting that purchase order approved. Our projector broke. I've got to follow up with my executives and make sure that they're going to click approve on all the things that they need to approve on in the purchasing system. All those little things that you've got to follow up on, they probably don't belong as discrete items in your project plan. And if your project plan is under change control, that would be kind of a nightmare if all the action items out of every meeting result in the change control to your project schedule. So we don't want to go there. Now, there are important things that you need to stay on top of. And I'd say they don't belong in your plan because they're not going to be on a critical path. They're not directly contributing to the project, but you still have to do them. And so how do you track them? You could use it there are a billion task management systems out there, but for me, keeping them in the same place as the risks and the issues and decisions that I need to keep an eye on it all the time, that kind of makes intuitive sense. So for example, if I'm going to go meet with an executive and say, I need to show you all the risks, I need to also be able to say, look, executive, these are all the things I need to do. Let me show you my action items that I have filtered for you to get done. It's in the same context. It keeps it all together. All right. And it's also, if you are not comfortable with delegation yet, action items in your rate log are really handy for that, because it's a nice secure way for you to delegate activities and tasks to other people to get done. And you can track them in there and not worry about, gee, if I ask somebody to do this, Am I going to forget about it? They're not going to get it done. And then it comes back around to me, and it's very painful. And we've got a question from Michelle. It says, would you say then that an action item is a task item? So no need for a task list, as you could incorporate here in the RAID log. I guess that depends on the definition of task. So I do know people, they use their RAID log as a project management super system, and they actually run their project plan out of the RAID log just because they don't have another tool. But if you have a scheduling tool, however simple, like an Asana, or even if you're using your team is using a Trello, or they're using Jira, whatever your team is using for their plan or their schedule, even Microsoft Project, the things that directly contribute to deliverables, your things that have a place on your critical path, those tools can be nice for that. I like to keep just more action item in the RAID log. I don't know if that makes sense. You can unmute and ask if you got it, if you want to.
I tend to use, on my RAID log, I tend to use the action items as a task item. So I was just curious if I was using it the right fashion.
If it's working for you, it's the right way. How about that?
Okay, it is working for me, yes.
Then you're there. All right, let's talk about issues. Has anybody ever gotten through an issue and said, gosh, I'd like to do that again? Give me some more of that. Probably not. And so that's the issue. That's the purpose of the issue log. An issue log tracks all of the unexpected problems that you've had, anything that takes your project off your plan. By off your plan, I mean, you didn't deliver what you thought what you committed to deliver in your project, or you didn't deliver it in the schedule that you committed to delivering it, or you didn't deliver it in the budget that you committed to. Any of those, or anything that can impact the satisfaction of your customers, your project stakeholders, any of those things should be put into your issue log. So think of it this way: if you finish your project and somebody comes up to you and said, why did this happen? What was the cause? You should be able to go back to your RAID log and say, well, here is the issue, and here's what happened, and here's what caused it, and here's how we responded. Now, when you have a big problem and your life becomes all about managing and resolving that critical issue on your project, what you really need is a platform that you can actively track and communicate exactly what's going on with that issue. So it's not just about history, it's about what's going on right now. And that's really where having an issue log pays for itself, because you've got a central place where you and everyone else on your team is involved in the issue can go and see exactly what's going on. You can say, okay, here's the latest update on this issue. Here's what we did. Here's the next steps. You can put that all in one place, and everybody knows that's where you go to get that update. You can even extend your RAID log a little bit and have a little bit of root cause analysis, maybe some long-term fixes, maybe some remediation you have to do, and you can track all of that here. Because if it's a really bad issue on your project, sooner or later, you are going to be asked to document what happened in that disaster. And say, what did you do? Who did you talk to? And, what did you do about it? All these things, you're going to be held account to that. So it's better to track that in your issue log than, as some of us have found ourselves, doing 100 searches in your Outlook inbox, trying to find all those emails that were flying like crazy right in the heat of the moment. So documenting it and keeping track of it is going to help you later on as well. It's also going to help you learn in future projects, because we don't want to have this issue ever again. And so one of the greatest sources of learnings for project delivery and for your organization is to go back and look at past issue logs. So what are the issues that came up for this project, what they did to do about it, and what was the impact, and what was the residual effort or result. Now, in an ideal world, issues are usually not a surprise. Ideally, you create a risk and then you monitor it, you try to manage it, but well, that turned into an issue. So in an ideal world, nothing lands on your issue log if you hadn't previously identified it as a risk. But the reality is it doesn't always work that way. So from a tactical perspective, if I'm managing my risk log and my issue log, if I've got a risk and it's turned into an issue, I'll note on the risk, hey, this was a risk and it turned into an issue. And I'm going to manage this going forward on my issue log. This is also important from a knowledge management perspective, because what I've done in the past as well is to say, all right, I'm going to go do this project. Show me all the risk logs for previous projects that were similar to this. Let me see how they responded to those risks, because first of all, maybe some of those risks I haven't even thought of. Maybe some I have, and they've already figured out a way to get around that risk so it didn't turn into an issue. And let me see all the risks that actually turned into an issue. So maybe I can find some way to try to avoid that. All really key in learning from past projects to improve future projects. All right, finally, decisions. And this is so often neglected, but bad decision-making is just, it's the poison pill for any project. Now, of course, in a project, you have planned decisions, maybe like phase gates. Maybe you say, all right, when we have finished our planning and we've got our detailed plan, we're going to stop, we're going to assess, or we're going to move forward. And then we're going to go through, kind of build our pilot. And then we're going to stop, we're going to assess, are we on the right track? Do we need to adjust, proceed? So you might start off and have formal phase gates at certain periods throughout your project. And so what you would do is you would plan those out in advance, and you would start thinking of those in advance to say, all right, I have this decision that has to get made. Who needs to make that decision? Who needs to be part of it, making that decision? And when a decision is made, who needs to be aware of it? And how do we implement the action plan that comes off of that? So a lot of these you can plan ahead, but very often you have decisions that come up ad hoc. So we're moving along in our project and whoops, we had an issue come up. Okay, we've resolved the issue, but now, oh, we've just spent a whole bunch of money resolving this issue. So we need more money, or we need to change our scope or our schedule. So let's get the team together. Let's make a decision how we're going to proceed. Now, whether the decision is ad hoc or it's planned, you still have to go through that same process. Who makes the decision? Who's authorized to make it? What is the decision? What are the options and what's available for them? And as a project manager, it's part of my responsibility to make sure that the decision makers associated with all those decisions are properly informed about them. So I have to understand and research that decision and say, look, here's option A, here's the good and the bad. Here's option B, here's the good and the bad. And as a project manager and as a leader, I should manage up. I should lend my expertise on this project to my sponsors and say things like, sponsor, it's your decision, but I strongly recommend option B for these reasons. So you need to give some guidance to your sponsors as well. And you can't do that if you're not really planning for these decisions, you're not documenting them, you're not thinking through them. And making decisions on a public document like a RAID log also helps publicize them and make sure that decision is implemented and that there is alignment with that. And what happens is very often on a project, I don't know if you've experienced this yet, but you can come into conflict. Sooner or later, you're going to have a change of people in your project sponsorship, or you're going to have somebody who kind of go back, they forget about a decision. They come back and say, hey, why did you do that? Why did you make this decision? That doesn't make any sense. You should not have done that. And so it's really important to be able to document that and hold yourself and the decision makers on your project accountable, even if it's that person questioning the decision that they may have already made. In fact, one of my long-term mentors, the one who actually taught me about RAID logs, she ran these massive merger and acquisition programs for big enterprises. And you can maybe imagine her, she's sitting in a conference room, and on one side of the conference table are people from one organization, and on the other side of the conference table are people from another organization. They're part of a merger, and they're looking at each other, and they know that when this whole thing is over, half of them are not going to have a job, because that's the way these things work. And so they're fighting to keep their jobs. So there's not a lot of incentive to work together and agree on things. but a lot of incentive to be kind of non-committal or reverse commitments if it, makes life hard for them or puts them at risk. And so how do you get decisions made in a forum like that? Well, what this mentor of mine did was she would put the RAID log up overhead on the overhead, and she had identified the decision that had to be made, and they would have the discussion, and she would type it right in front of them, and they would see real time her typing the decision, the discussion, and the result. And so when the decision was made, she would put everybody's name, Bob, Mary, Joe, Sue, all right there. She would type it all up there. And you can bet that if somebody saw their name go up there, they certainly paid a lot more attention to what was on that risk register or the decision register. And so this is a way that she got to really to lock in commitment and to document that through the course of her projects. And it really shows the power of decision log. And I don't know if you've experienced this. I know I have, is when you get to the end of the project and you've had maybe a change of sponsorship and a new sponsor comes in and you're almost to the goal line, you're almost done, and they come and they start questioning every decision you've made along the way. And being able to justify what you've done and why you've done it really goes a long way to helping you get that project complete. But it also may serve as a proper format for undoing some decisions, because if you document a decision appropriately, you can document what were the assumptions and the justification for decisions that were made in the past, because those conditions, those assumptions that were tied to that decision months or a year later might be completely different. So we might say, well, we used this product because it was the best one on the market. A year later, it might not be the best one on the market. It might be changed to go back and change that decision and use another tool to achieve your project. If you don't have that documented, nobody knows why you did it. And it just kind of falls into myth, and we just sort of do the same thing over and over. All right. And so that is RAID log, 4 tabs. Now, can you add more tabs? Of course. In fact, that is one of the most powerful things about a RAID log. It's the central place for these key operational tools that you can use to run your project and keep yourself straight. So if you need to change it, just add another tab. You need more data, just add another column. It's dynamic and stupid easy. You don't have to submit a ticket to IT or buy a new product. It's right there, and it's just, you can get it done and take care of your project, which is really the important thing. Now, some of the more common additions that we do are lessons learned. So you create a new tab in your RAID log, call it lessons learned. And I really like this approach for lessons learned, because you should be capturing those as you go through your project. As soon as you learn something, you want to pass forward to the next project, the next team, and say, oh, well, make sure you do this and you reduce pain. Or, oh man, we really suffered a lot here on this. We have these 3 issues, and the lesson learned is do this instead. And what I like about doing this as separate, discrete lessons learned is you can then make each one of those actionable. So a lesson learned is open. You can't close that lesson learned until something has happened. So somebody has updated a template, they've changed a process, they've done something to help you take action from that lesson learned, or indexed it in a way that you can refer to it later from another project. Change log, really important. Projects change, and that's okay. That's the nature of projects. We're going to use a different supplier. We're going to extend the budget. We're going to change what we're going to do from a deliverable perspective. And that's all good as long as the change is monitored and controlled and integrated into the plan. And a perfect way to track that is in a separate tab listing all the changes. What was the change? Who approved it? When did they approve it? What was the change? What was the impact to the scope, schedule, budget, risk, and so on. Another thing that's really handy is if you've got the spreadsheet here that's, it's at hand, you're pulling it up all the time. If you need a place to track your stakeholders, your contacts, or even your RACI matrix to identify who in the project, who has the role, who has decision-making authority here. Those kinds of things are really nice to keep handy within your RAID log because it's easy and it's at hand. Very often, I find this especially useful when working with international groups, is I create a calendar. And so I'll track key events like enterprise blackout dates, of course, but also different countries' holidays, or when I've got team members that are going on vacation. There may be other places to track it, but it's really nice to have all of that in one place. So if somebody says, hey, we need to do this workshop, can we do it on this date? You can see Is there a conflict with a key production event or a holiday or something like that? I also like to use, if I'm delivering a project for a customer, it's a contractual relationship, especially if there are milestones, contracted milestones along the way. It's nice to have another tab just to track where we are on those milestones, because you can copy it and you can paste it in your status reports, or you can refer to it in the status meeting. It's just really nice to have a key list of those milestones. Where are we? What's our current due date? What was our original committed date? So we can track all those. Are they red, yellow, green from a status perspective? And of course, you can track external dependencies. And I did say that very often this can be handled, and maybe better, very often handled in your schedule, but sometimes they can be very effectively managed in your RAID log. So remember our friends in the UK and our stuffy, maybe mildewy smelling conference room. So let's go back to that. So if you remember where we were, is I sat there and I said, all right, I flipped up on my laptop and I said, let's start a RAID log. And I started off like this. I said to the customer, I said, I know you just kind of unloaded, but what is the biggest issue right now that is most concerning to you? And they told me what it was, and I typed it. I typed it right there. Everybody could see it up on the board, and they corrected me maybe. And so I make sure I had it phrased exactly the way that reflected their concerns and how they viewed the issue. I said, okay, what else you got? What else you got? It was very cathartic. I just let it all out again. And I documented every single one of them. And then at the end of it, it was a pretty long list. And so no more issues. Nope, that's it. So they said, okay. And I looked at my side of the table. I said, okay, what are your issues? What are the problems that you're having? Oh, and again, they lit up. So I typed up every issue. Is that right? Is that correct? Yeah, let's change the word. And there was a little back and forth with the customer, but I got all of the issues from both sides up, and we sat there and we looked at them and, asked some clarifying questions here and there. And, we said, I don't remember, somebody at the table said, most of these look like they're tied to misunderstandings, like misunderstood dependencies, because our team was expecting the customer to do things, know things, and deliver things. Customer had no idea that they were supposed to deliver those things, or even what some of those things were. And so they couldn't deliver them to our team. And so our team couldn't do what they were supposed to do. And it just kind of went back and forth and back and forth. So I said, all right, let's create a new tab called external dependencies. And let's just go through all the things that our team needs the customer to do before we can do our thing. And let's explain what they are. And so we developed this list of and we kind of went through this process. And what was really magical through this whole thing, this whole process, it took hours, was that through the course of this day, the chairs at the conference table, they gradually started to turn like this. And through the course of the day, we were talking about the issues. We were talking about the dependencies. Our focus was not us versus them like this. We were together working on the issues jointly. We were working on the things that we had to address together as a team, and focusing on the problems, not on each other. And for me, that's really the magic of a RAID log, is getting these items out, putting them into a forum that we could externalize and turn it into something concrete that we can look at, that we can understand, that we could collaborate on together and maybe resolve. And that really goes to illustrate one of the key principles of RAID logs and tools in general that I find, is that the more chaotic the environment, the more people will gravitate to a simple tool, the simplicity of a RAID log. So if we had gone through that same scenario in UK, and I had brought in some really complex tool, I had to go and get help everybody go through a tutorial to learn how to use it and explain the tool, we would not have made that progress. It worked because it was very, very simple, and we could all use it together. And it's really important, especially in a critical situation. When it's a contentious situation, people will gravitate to something as simple. And once you show it to somebody and walk somebody through it, they can understand it and you can communicate with it. And so that was the first day in the UK. We got through our list of issues and we said, okay, what's the next steps that we have to resolve these issues and these dependencies? And so we flipped over to action items. And we said, okay, what are the things we got to do to get this sorted out? Boom, boom, boom. We were working on this. And what was really cool is through the course of the week, when something else would come up, we have another action item, or maybe we've got another risk, another issue. The customer even started saying, hey, I got this thing. We got to get it on the RAID log. It made me really happy. So we got it out there. And so I guess the moral of the story, before I get to the end of the story, let's talk about some other ways that you can use your RAID log, and I'll tell you how that whole story ended. So you use it to run your RAID logs, and you use your RAID log to run your project and stay on top of everything. But what's great about it is it's current, it's event. So especially if you're task switching, if you're a project manager like most of us, and you don't have one project, you've got a bunch of projects, and you need to switch from this project to this project. One of the best tools I found to do that is to pop up your RAID log, because instantly you're back in it. You can see all the details. This is exactly where I was. This is what I need to focus on next. It really eases that and makes you much more efficient at that. And of course, if you've got a big project, then you've got hundreds of things that you've got to get done, and it gives you a central place to keep all that stuff together. Now, this next one is interesting. So you can, the mentor I mentioned earlier that worked in the merger and acquisition, excuse me, she had another thing she did. She said, I don't do meeting minutes. And I said, how do you not do meeting minutes when you're in these contentious environments? You're working with these executives that are at each other. How do you have a meeting and not have meeting minutes? She says, well, what are the things that come out of a meeting? Well, your new risks or updated risks, action items, issues, and you make decisions. It's your RAID log. Why do you need anything else? And that really blew my mind. Now, personally, I've never been able to go all the way and not do anything other than a RAID log. But I think what the main message here is that your RAID log should play the central role in your meetings. Maybe it's really the agenda, or it's certainly a follow-up item, something you update in the course of your meeting, in your project meetings, because it's on. It's not something you do once and then you put away in a SharePoint, or you send it by email and you forget about. Bring it into the context of your project and how you run your project. And if you have a meeting that doesn't have any risks, issues, actions, or decisions, then maybe ask why you had the meeting. Other uses are what I call manage up. So as a manager, a leader, project manager, if I'm running a RAID log, I've got sponsors, I've got executives that are sponsoring that project. Maybe they're my boss and they want to know what I'm doing. More importantly, for me to be successful as a leader, I need to engage my executives. I need to put them to work and keep them informed. And the great tool for that is a RAID log. Now, you're not going to pull up a spreadsheet and show them a list of 500 risks. That's going to be a disaster. But what you do is you go and you filter those down to the minimum things that you need to talk about in that meeting to those managers, and you engage them. And it's also a way to demonstrate that you are in control and you're on top of things, because you've got this tool that lets you do that. You can also manage down. If I'm running a program and I have project managers, or I'm a PMO leader and I need to check in with my project managers and say, what are you doing? How are you managing these projects? What are the problems that you're having? How are you addressing things that can go wrong? That's all in the RAID log. So sit down with your team members and say, all right, show me these projects, show me your top 5 risks, show me your top decisions that you've got coming up in the next month. What are the main issues you're working on? That's a great way to coach your project managers, at the same time making sure that those projects that you're ultimately responsible for are being managed correctly. It's also a great way to manage your suppliers and your customers, because very often you won't have a common tool that you can use with them. So providing a platform for you to communicate with them is great for your RAID log. And finally, remediating troubled projects. This is where I've been in a lot of roles where I've had to go and spend a lot of time saving projects, or taking, kind of recovering them or sorting them out and figuring out if we should destroy them and end the project. And there is no better tool to get your project under control than a RAID log. So speaking of which, let's wrap up our story in our dank little musty conference room that smelled a little bit like old ashtrays. So after a week there, we ended up actually getting the project back on track. They withdrew their letter threatening to cancel the project and charging us for their trouble. And we gradually started to rebuild trust again. And within a couple months, we had the project back on track and delivered, and I got to go home. Which takes me to one last bit of advice that I give to every project manager that I coach and mentor that does any work, especially when it's related to public sector. And it's this: always treat your RAID log like it's subject to subpoena, because one day it might be, and you wish that you had it. All right, key takeaways. Let's wrap this up. Projects go wrong because of the basics, and RAID logs are great because they help you manage those basics. And RAID logs can be effective regardless of how you work or your project size. And that's pretty much it. So I hope that the biggest thing you take away from this is that whenever you start to feel like your projects are not totally in control, or you feel uncertainty about your project, you have to start a new project, you have to take over someone else's project, or you have to save a broken project. I hope that the very first 4 or 5 words that you say to yourself or the people in the room are, show me your RAID log. That's it. Thank you very much. Connect to me on LinkedIn. If you like RAID logs, you want to learn more, I got Ultimate Guide to RAID Log. I've got a book on Amazon. I actually built an app we're launching next month because, spreadsheets are great and they'll get you started, but we think there can be better. You can listen to more of me going on at the Project Management Happy Hour podcast. Please connect to me. And I will also send after this, I don't know how we distribute these, but I'll give you a copy of these slides. And to get you started, I've got a template RAID log. Stupid simple, like a RAID log should be. Thanks, everybody.
Wow, that was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. And just, I see knowledge management all over the place. And especially when you're talking about having the decision spreadsheet up and updating it live, like during the meeting, I'm just thinking about all the meetings where I want that. I want, like an information radiator. Oh,
Absolutely.
the decisions were made. No, they weren't. Yeah, they were in the meeting, remember? And it's up on the board. Just a very elegant way to use, because I love Excel. I really love, it's like my favorite Microsoft tool. And this is like, hey, yeah, it's all in this one document, a worksheet. Really, really, really elegant way to manage the project. So I'm already thinking, okay, what can I use this for? So and I know my boss, I was talking to her and seeing if she wanted to use this. I said, hey, I heard about these things, but now I feel like I know so much more. So thank you so much. This was wonderful.
You're
Wonderful.
very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And just what we try to do is we try to post slides or any other handouts or things. We have our Dropbox. So if you send those slides to me or Bill, so that we can post them for our community, and we will be taking this recording and posting it on our YouTube channel, which the address is in the chat. So if anybody wants to see that, and I encourage you to go there. We've been doing this. It's probably been 1.5 years since we've been recording things. So we have a nice collection for people about knowledge of our community. So this is really, thank you so much for doing this, Kim.
I'm very happy to spread the word on RAID logs any chance I get.
Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions. This is Liz, but Kim, I really loved the idea of the RAID log from a historical perspective, because in knowledge management, we really believe in lessons learned and kind of looking back and having the past inform the future. And I just see people trying to tackle new projects, looking at those in the past. Like you said, give me all the RAID logs of like past projects that have been similar to this. And I really think of that being a great way to kind of inform a lessons learned that we like to do in knowledge management. So I definitely see a really strong tie-in with that. So thanks for talking about that.
Yeah, I always try to avoid reliving the same pain over and over. It's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I don't always succeed, but I try to. So the slides I'll send, they also have a couple supplemental slides, some data from the study I mentioned. We did a survey at PMI Global and just asked, do you use a RAID log? What's the benefit you get out of it? So we've got some survey results I'll put in there as well.
Okay. Denise, did you have a question?
Yes, a quick one. Thank you. That was a really great presentation and a very refreshing way to hear it presented. I was just wondering, and I don't know if there's a simple answer. A lot of times in the project planning period, I know we talk about the risks upfront, very early in the planning, but sometimes the risks are not as obvious.
Right.
And people kind of just put what they come up with then, and you continue to monitor those. And I really like the way you explained it. I mean, it makes sense. It's a living document, and you review constantly, and you add to those risks and build on the assumptions. I mean, because ideally, not ideally, but usually the way it is used in my organization is they try to identify the risks and the assumptions really early, but usually at that point it's too vague to tackle. Do you recommend, I know you say, oh, review it from the project manager's point of view weekly, but do you recommend regular team reviews of minimum, I don't know, periods when you must review so that you can update that?
I do. So I think I totally agree, because what we were saying about at the beginning of the project, it's a lot to tackle. And not only that, when you start a project, that is the point in time when you know the least about the project, because you're just starting it out. And as you go, you learn about it, you learn about the things you need to do, you learn more about what the deliverables look like, what you're going to have to do to get it done, and you learn more about where things can go wrong. And so that's something that will be progressively developed as you go along in the project. As far as how frequently they should go on, I think that really depends on the nature of the project. If you've got a lot of risk in a project, you've got a lot going on. It'll also kind of go up and down by phase, but the project manager, I think, should look at every RAID log at least once per week. If nothing else, then at least do it a review, give it an update, make sure you're on track at the beginning or the end of each week before you send out your status report. And that at least that mental check-in will keep you on track. For me, it's much more frequently, especially if the project is really kind of moving along, then I'll be in there daily. It's kind of it's just there. And especially if you've got active decisions coming up, you've got issues that you're working, you're going to be in there a lot more frequently. And when I talk about the project manager doing this, I don't think they should be alone in a little room doing it. I think the best way to do it is pull it up in front of your project team and say, hey, let's go through our top risk real quick. Let's see how we're doing on these, because your team's going to, in many cases, know more about what's going on than you, because they're the ones doing a lot of the hands-on work. I've worked with some project managers where they take their RAID log and they're afraid of other people changing it or getting the wrong impression. So they keep it to themselves as their personal organization tool. I mean, at least do that. If you don't have anything else, do that as a starter. But the value of it really comes out of it being a collaboration tool. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, more knowledge
Okay.
management among, I see knowledge management among all of the project stakeholders. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is it for today. Thank you so much, Kim, for this wonderful presentation. Everybody, I'm hoping we'll see you next month. at the next meeting, and all you need to make sure you get the invitation is join our meetup group, and you'll just automatically get invited to our monthly meetings. And as I said, if anybody has something they'd like to share or to talk about, please reach out to me or Pascal or anybody just to get on the calendar, because this is something that we do every month, and I think it's been real valuable. So I thank you all for your time tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching KMCDC's presentation. Hope to see you at the next monthly meeting.